So, is there any way we can mute ourselves if we're not talking?
We are live now, Kathy. How are you? Yes, hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here. My name is Anisha Hardy, and I serve as the Executive Director for Alabama Values, which is a statewide communications hub focused on narrative, messaging, and digital strategies to just help build a more informed, engaged, and people-powered democracy. Our work sits at the intersection of culture, media, and public opinion, and we focus on how meaning is made, because we do believe that meaning shapes how people understand their role, their power, and what action looks like. We are proud to be in partnership with the Southern Leadership for Voter Education, who many of us may know as SOLVE, which is a regional network working across the South to support organizing, civic engagement, and infrastructure on the ground. And tonight is part of a broader series of briefings around the fight for fair maps. So, we're not just responding to the moments, we're really building a shared understanding across states and across our communities. And I want to just ground us before we hear from our panelists this evening that we're joining and we're giving an update around the Callais case. And I want to just say that this is not just about a court case. This is not just about maps. This is undoubtedly about power. Who gets to have it, who gets to keep it, and who is expected to fight for it. The Callais ruling is a meaning-making moment. And what I mean by that is this. What matters just as much as the decision itself is the meaning that people attach to it, because meaning shapes whether people disengage, feel defeated, or understand this as part of a longer pattern, right, in our country's history and respond accordingly. And right now, I am seeing a lot of framing that flattens this moment. I'm seeing folks frame this as just a partisan fight, as Democrats versus Republicans, as just another political battle. And that framing is just not complete. It's an incomplete framing, and it's very dangerous because it erases what is actually happening here and what this issue is rooted in. This country's long history of white supremacy and anti-Blackness, and the consistent restructuring of systems every time Black communities get closer to political power. And that is the through line, from Reconstruction to voting rights, to the Voting Rights Act, to Shelby, and to now. And we have to be honest about that if we're going to respond clearly in this moment. And I also want to ground us in something else, that Black political power has never only benefited Black people. Every gain Black communities have made in this country has moved this country forward, expanding access, expanding rights, expanding what democracy looks like. So when we talk about fair maps and when we talk about representation, we are not talking about something that is narrow or just this niche thing. We are talking about the health and future of everyone in this democracy. So what to expect this evening? So tonight, this is not going to be just a traditional briefing. We're not just here to explain what happened. We're going to move through three parts. Part one, yes, what happened and why does it matter? Part two, how are we making meaning of this moment? And part three, we're going to talk about power and talk about strategy and what comes next. And so you're going to hear from voices across legal, policy, organizing, and community spaces, because guess what? It takes all of those lenses to fully understand what this moment is about. And so at this time, I want to bring our panelists and welcome them, to the call to introduce themselves briefly. So if you can just, we'll kick it off with you, Ashley. If you can just introduce yourself, your organization, and then we'll go to the next person and we'll dive in.
Excellent. Well, first, thank you so much for having me this evening. My name is Ashley Shelton, and I'm the president and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. And we are a power power building and civic engagement table here in the state of Louisiana. And again, thank you for having me tonight.
Yes, Miss Beverly.
Yes, this is wonderful, Anisha, to be a part of this panel tonight. I'm Beverly Cooper, co-founder of Stand Up Mobile. Our organization is a 5-year-old community organizing group of nothing but volunteers who believe that the only way we will make changes in our community is that we bring the power of the Black vote to every election. That's the work that we've been doing over these last 5 years, and we continue to do it. We see what's going on right now is just continuation of the fight and also the intentional activities that we try to make sure that our community recognizes and is ready to get out and fulfill.
Thank you so much. Alejandra.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Alitra Perryman. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Mississippi NAACP State Conference. The NAACP is one of the oldest and boldest civil rights organizations in the country with over 100 years under the Nationals belt. And here in Mississippi, we've been here over 80 years. So thank you for having me.
Yes. Ryan.
Hey everybody, Ryan Wagner. I'm the Policy and Narrative Director for Alabama Values. Alabama Values focuses on civic engagement, education, research, and coalition communications. We help communities understand what's happening and why it matters.
Thank you. Mitch.
Good evening, everyone. Mitchell Brown. I go by Mitch. I am the SOLVE coordinator at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, in addition to being senior counsel. SOLVE stands for Southern Leadership for Voter Engagement. Grateful to be here tonight. SOLVE was founded in 2014 after the Shelby County Beholder decision as a way to connect Southern organizations across the South to fight back against voter suppression wherever we see it. So I look forward to having a great conversation.
Yes. Kathy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy Sykes, and I'm Executive Director of the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance. It's an organization that fights in the belly of the beast to assist immigrants as they try to navigate the legal process. We have an attorney on staff. We also try to affect policy on the state level. We just try to assist immigrants and educate the larger community on facts and not the untruths that are often told about immigrants in Mississippi.
Great. And Jennison, last but not least.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Genesis Robinson here, Executive Director for Equal Brown Education and Action Fund. We're a state-led, statewide voter education organization focusing on Black communities, trying to increase civic engagement and build Black political power. And delighted to be here with you all as we have this very critical conversation.
Yes. All right, y'all. So speaking of critical, let's dive in. So before we can go and talk about, meaning or strategy, we need to have a shared understanding of what this decision did and what it changes. And I want to make sure, we let folks know in just everyday language, the real world impact. And so who better to help us do that than my brother, Mitchell Brown. Mitch, I want to start with you. Can you break this down for us? What did the court actually do and what does this change? What does it mean?
Yeah. So what the court did is it made it harder to bring a Section 2 Voting Rights Act case. Just for educational purposes, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed after much fighting and much protests throughout the South regarding Black voters not being able to vote and that not being translated into political power. And so the VRA was passed in 1965, and they had two pieces of the Voting Rights Act that were the main engines of the Voting Rights Act. The first was Section 5, which was a preclearance provision that unfortunately was struck down in Shelby County Beholder in 2013. And that opened the floodgates to a lot of voter suppression. And then Section 2 was a section of the Voting Rights Act that helped prevent vote denial and vote dilution. When it comes to redistricting, we talk about vote dilution. What that means is, do Black and brown voters and other voters of color have access to elect their candidates of choice? Do they have what is known as an equal opportunity to elect their candidates of choice? And this court over time has chipped away at Section 2. And chipped away, and finally they have all but said that Section 2 is nullified. And what I mean by that is no longer can we, really bring a Section 2 claim and say that Black voters or brown voters or AAPI voters have less opportunity to elect their candidates of choice. We basically have to prove that the legislature intentionally discriminated against the Black voters or intentionally discriminated against other voters of color. And you may be saying, yes, it's all discriminatory, it's all racist, and it's all a remnant of white supremacy, and you would be correct. However, this court added a part of the opinion that said that, if the reason why legislature drew the map a certain way for partisan reasons, that's the end of the day, essentially. And we would have to prove that there's a better map that achieves the same partisan interest of the legislature. And because they did not choose that, that gives indicia of intentional discrimination, basically meaning that they purposely chose not to have this map because it would intentionally chose not to choose a certain map that achieved a partisan end that they wanted, but would help Black voters, and they didn't choose it. And so this court said we, in my opinion, basically collapsed the inquiry that we would have to bring in court to basically say that we had to have what is known as smoking gun racial discrimination evidence. And so that's what this court said. And what that means is that, we now have limited tools in our arsenal. In 2024, there was a case out of South Carolina NAACP versus Alexander, which said that you can't, it made it harder to bring racial gerrymandering claims. This Callais case makes it harder to bring Section 2 claims. The really only claim that we have now is under the Constitution, 14th and 15th Amendment. And those claims are very hard to prove without actual direct evidence that the legislature is trying to discriminate against Black voters. We all know that. We all know that they are trying to do that, but they're hiding under partisan motives. And the court said that that's fine. And I'll end with this. The court also mentioned that, times have changed, essentially, that racism of the past is not the same as racism today. The word, I want to make sure I read the right word. It says we've made great strides in entrenched racial discrimination. However, part of making those great strides is statutes like the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act of 1968. That is the reason why we've made great strides, and now the court has taken that away. And it says nothing and deals nothing with the institutionalization of racism in this country that harms us each and every day. So those great strides were only made because we've had these protections, and now those protections are in jeopardy.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you so much. Ryan, I want to shift us from what the court did to how that decision actually moves through systems, because policy is where this becomes real for folks, right? Is where a court decision stops being this abstract thing and starts shaping people's lived experiences. And what we know is that when representation is diluted, it doesn't just impact elections, it impacts everything: schools, healthcare, infrastructure, environmental decisions, just the overall responsiveness or lack thereof of the government to the people it's supposed to serve. So the question here, just from a policy standpoint, help us understand, what does this decision mean on the ground in states like Alabama and across the South right now? What shifts, what gets harder, and where should people be paying attention?
So you're going to hear me say this often. Some of you have heard this: so goes the South, so goes the rest of the nation. It's not an outlier. This is a policy roadmap, just like Project 2025. It's no secret. The Roberts Court, particularly Chief Justice Roberts, has been at this for the better part of 40 years, since I've been alive, even going as far as to say the Voting Rights Act was a mistake. So 9 times out of 10, this is going to have direct impact on the Deep South, where we've been bear witness to the strategic, unfortunate successes of the Southern strategy of Richard Nixon. The immediate fallout is these runaway state legislatures running off. They couldn't wait to do their own redistricting sessions of their own, like clockwork. It reminds me of the Dobbs decision overturning Roe, where you had states in the South with trigger ban laws in place just in case. Mm-hmm. This is a similar sort of Formula One style sprint to the end to cheat. And so, of course, Florida was first out the gate, but I'll let Genesis talk about Florida, whose maps were signed into law today, if I'm not mistaken. So with Alabama, we also have a special session that started today. after the governor indicated she wouldn't. So she lied. And I also want to say that some of the states this is happening in already have state versions of the SAVE Act, which I can't continue speaking on this without saying that which will have direct impacts on voter ID, among other things, passports, all of that, voter ID requirements. So this is not happening in a vacuum. This is coordinated effort by the supermajority legislatures to deeply entrench their power, dare I say it, white minority rule. So that's one of the things. My role entails connecting what the policy is to the streets, what's going on in the streets, so that our folks are informed, whether that's town halls, Southern road shows, if you will, and putting those things in plain terms. So I will say the biggest thing that has happened after the decision is these runaway special sessions across the South to figure out how to cheat ahead of the midterms.
And you just gonna drop off with that. Okay. Look, I know, right? I think, and
I will go on and on.
Yeah, yes, no, we'll come back to that. And I think it's, I think that is I think we are dealing with this in real time, right? Everything is moving so fast. And so with that, Ashley, Genesis, Alitra, I want to bring you all into the conversation. I want to widen the lens here, because while, this is a Supreme Court case, what we're seeing right now is not, as we mentioned, just contained to one state. And I think Ryan, you used the phrase, as goes the South, so goes the nation. So this is moving across the South. And it is interacting with very specific political landscapes and histories and organizing infrastructures, right? And what we know is that when moments like this happen, states don't just respond legally, they respond politically. They respond through legislation, through administrative decisions, through how quickly they move to redraw lines, reshape districts, and ultimately redefine who has access to power. But at the same time, communities are responding too, right? Organizers are interpreting this moment. They're adjusting strategy. They're deciding how to engage or re-engage people who may be confused and frustrated, or even feeling disconnected. So, this is not just about, I'm going to say this all evening, what the ruling says. It's about how it is being used, how it is being interpreted, and how it is being felt across different states. And, so each of you sitting in a different state context, Louisiana, where the case is directly rooted, in Florida, where we've already seen an aggressive map manipulation, in Mississippi, where there are longstanding barriers to representation. So I want to hear from you, you three. So, how are you seeing this play out across the South right now? And, in your state specifically, like, what are you seeing in your states, and what should people understand about how this moment is unfolding on the ground?
Well, this is Ashley. I'm happy to get us started because, again, I think that, one of the things that sits with me still is that, we brought the original case, Robinson versus Landry, with the intent to restore and to create fair and just maps in the state of Louisiana, just to then have Callais intervene and make this case about actually further disenfranchising Black and other minority voters. And what we're seeing in Louisiana is wild, right? I mean, so our governor illegally canceled the House congressional election. As some of you may know, and I'll leave it to the lawyers because I always tease, I just play a lawyer on TV, not in real life. But the Supreme Court makes its decision, but the decision does not become law until the parties have an opportunity over 32 days, if I'm not mistaken, to make whatever asks or requests of the court they would like to make. So he's both messing with that window of time where we still have, can take a course in any number of courses of action, but also too, we are actively in an election. Our, absentee ballots have already gone out. Overseas voters and elderly voters already had their ballots. Many have already been completed. Early voting started on Saturday. I'm really proud to say that 31% of all early voting or African American voters. And so I'm so glad that the message of this decision, what Black voters understood that it meant for them, is getting through. And so there are a couple of different legal challenges that we have made. We tried a temporary restraining order that was denied, and now we see another case that many of the candidates have now joined. House congressional candidates have joined that will be before the judges of the Middle District here in the state of Louisiana. And so there is a lot of legal maneuvering that is playing out. And we are just telling voters here in the state of Louisiana to vote, to early vote, and to vote your complete ballot. Like, do not allow, the signage and the things that we keep hearing them say, which is that the House congressional has been canceled, because in fact, no court has decided that, and we are still in the midst of multiple legal actions. And so for Louisiana, this is pretty serious, right? Like, so we are, and let me run through what is on the Louisiana ballot. So in addition to the House congressional, you've got 2 Public Service Commission seats. You've got a Louisiana State Supreme Court seat. You've also got Louisiana State Senate that's also on this ballot, as well as 5 constitutional amendments that voters are going to have to move through. And so all of this is about voter suppression. All of this is about voter confusion. And for us, again, setting us up for what will be any number of different legal battles around the fact that they have disenfranchised all voters in the state of Louisiana, not even just minority voters. The other thing that I think is important for folks to know about this decision is that we are seeing this play out in the South immediately, right? I mean, which is, to Mitch's point, what was so unfortunate about, the justices having the audacity to say that we no longer need racial remedies because somehow the South has made advances and moved forward. And then we saw within an hour, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, all moving to pull back the progress that was hard won and hard fought. And, and again, folks want to, talk about like, oh, this was a piece of policy that was passed. But the Voting Rights Act was not just a piece of policy, right? Like, people died for the Voting Rights Act to exist in its entirety. There was terror, right? Like, that existed then and exists now, that we had to live through and that we had to push through to be able to actually realize what the Voting Rights Act had provided for our states over the last 60 years. And what this decision does is, at every level of government across this country, it gives state legislatures the ability to redistrict and to redistrict any opportunity seat. And if you're in the South in particular, any seat that's held by an African American or other minority is typically an opportunity district. And Section 2 protected those opportunity seats, and that protection is no longer available unless through, as Mitch said, some very complicated legal strategy to try to get to some kind of parity. But at the end of the day, what the decision has done is basically, neutered the voices and the ability of Black and other minority voters to elect candidates of choice and therefore have representation at every level of government. And I think that, that's what we're all sitting with. That's what we're all kind of pushing through and fighting through as we try to, move forward into we will not be discouraged and dismayed or moved by this decision. But nonetheless, it is, it is the loss of, 60 years worth of, like I said, a hard-won victory that cost people their lives. And like I said, a level of terror that many of our generations have never seen, but certainly still experience in some way, in particular in the South. But this is nationwide. And I think we're seeing the implications immediately in the South and in states like Louisiana. But it's coming to a state near you, which is as goes South goes the nation. That is literally what it means. I always tell folks it's whole. It's here. It takes them a year to run these terrible policies and strategies through our states, and then it's wholesale to the rest of the country within a year. And whether that's right to work, or any number of different, pieces of, terrible policy that hurt, hurt citizens. That is, as goes the South, goes the nation. That's the strategy. And so, and now we're seeing with Supreme Court cases, whether it's Dobbs, whether it's Callais, right? Like this, using these cases to turn what was meant as a positive struggle into something that does the complete opposite.
Yes, no, thank you for that, Ashley. And I want to go to you next, Genesis. Can you bring us in Florida? Take us to Florida. Like, how are you seeing this play out? What are you seeing in your state right now? What should people understand about how this moment is unfolding on the ground there?
Yeah, thank you, Anisha. This is a really pivotal moment and quite consequential for the history of our state. We have seen our legislature already move forward with accepting maps that was drawn by our governor, and I said that way intentionally. The Florida legislature has really taken a very hands-off approach to this mid-decade redraw, and despite it being their duty to draw maps, despite it being their duty to send maps over to the governor, they sat back on their hands as he drew maps that decimated political representation from millions of Floridians. And what's unique about Florida that we have to bring into the conversation is about 15 years ago, Florida voters passed what's known as the Fair District Amendments. This is very central to this conversation because, as we know, they're using partisanship as a guise to attack Black voters. But the reality is Florida voters got ahead of the curve 15 years ago. And so they said, we don't even want our district drawn to favor political parties. We don't want them drawn to favor incumbents. We don't want them drawn to diminish Black and brown voting power. And unfortunately, that is exactly what we have seen in a map that just the legislature last week that decimated not only Black representation, but tilted the scales in favor of the Republican Party here in the state, which is already in control for pretty much the totality of my lifetime. Republicans have ran the state of Florida, and yet they're rigging the map and stacking the deck by going even further. They hold 41% of the voter registration share in this state, and yet the map that was just produced gives them about 85% control of the legislative seats. Where I'm from, that's called cheating, plain and simple, right? Everybody understands that, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, to go so far as to rig the maps in your favor in that way in a state that is as diverse and sophisticated as Florida is a real problem. And what gets me, right, because we know that Callais is really just what they believe will be legal justification to do what they wanted to do all along, and that's to steal Black political power and representation, right? But what's interesting in Florida is before Callais was even decided, they had already started advancing this plan, right? So you have some states that will undoubtedly use Callais as an excuse. Florida had already begun the process. The maps were already drawn, right? This was something that was in motion long before that decision had come down. And so we got to continue to fight this on every front. I'm proud to announce that today we did file litigation against the state of Florida and Ron DeSantis. We were one of the first organizations out the gate because we deeply believe that this is a true attack on the rights of Floridians, and it cannot go unchecked. And we got to make sure that we're doing everything in our power to stand up, fight back, and secure voting rights for people who live here in the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, and thank you all for holding the line and keeping the fight for fair maps going in your state. Alicia, I want to go to you next.
So in Mississippi, we are fighting as always, since forever. So a few years ago, the Mississippi NAACP was a plaintiff in a lawsuit that resulted in some maps changing. We received 2 Senate districts and an extra House district. And last year, we were able to elect Black officials into those 3 seats. So we were super excited. Having those Senate seats broke the state supermajority. Also, last year, the Mississippi ACLU challenged how we elect state Supreme Court justices because the districts dilute Black voting power. So, a federal court agreed that those lines needed to be redrawn during the session. Well, our legislators didn't take the matter up and didn't draw any lines during our session. And our governor said, well, we're waiting on Calais. And once the ruling hits, then I'll call a special session within 21 days and we'll draw the lines then. So that's where we are. But when we look at the rules, he could call a special session anytime he wants to. And he doesn't have to wait 21 days. So we don't know when the session will be. But what we do know is the Capitol is under construction. So the session will take place in the old state Capitol. Which just gives you a visual of where we are, where they're trying to put us in Mississippi. But that's not where our story ends. We have been organizing. We spent all of Q1 going across the state, doing town hall meetings, letting people know that the VRA was under attack and what it could mean. So we have people in all corners of the state ready to mobilize. And we also have our legal nonprofits working together to figure out how we litigate. So in Mississippi, we're fighting forward. You know, we know when we fight, we win.
Yes, when we fight, we win. Keyword. And Ms. Beverly and Kathy, I want to bring us fully into the lived experience of this moment. Because, you know, we could talk about the court's policy maps, but at the end of the day, you know, this shows up in people's everyday lives. And for communities that are already pushed to the margins, this isn't new, right? This often reinforces what they've already experienced, being overlooked, being under-resourced, and disconnected from decision-making that directly impacts their lives. So I want to ground us there. You know, what does this moment, mean for everyday people, especially those already pushing to the margins? And what are you seeing, and hearing from folks in your communities right now?
And that's an excellent point that you're making too, about they're already pushed to the margins. And as the decision was made, what we started to get were lots of questions about what does this mean? And you could tell there was a nervousness about it. They knew something had happened, thinking about where they stand right now in their lives, what's going on with them and their families and their children. And they knew that this decision had some meaning, but they weren't quite sure what it was. We do a lot of tabling events and out in the community. And over this last year and a half, most of the time when people come to our table, they will want to say, I want to register to vote, but then I also have this concern. Housing is an issue for me, transportation, healthcare for my children and my family, grocery prices. And they start laying out all of the things that they're concerned with. And they look at us, Anisha, and they're saying, you're telling me that if I vote, that I can do something about this. But the question is how soon and how fast. When something like Calais happens and they get a sense that, okay, people are saying this is a big deal and it means that we've had a setback, I've just started being very honest with them and suggest that we're at a point where we're back to Jim Crow. Most people at least recognize what that's all about, and the idea of actually having to think about ourselves being pushed back to Jim Crow is something that they can relate to. Last night, I had a couple of conversations with some youth groups, and they're so upset and concerned that they're ready to go to the polls right now. So it's like, I'm saying that's the kind of energy that we've been trying to actually just kind of pull out and actually push forward in Mobile and in other parts of Alabama. The community power that we need is to be that individuals are tired of what they're seeing and feeling and not having, that we need to get out and do something about it. And to have young people stand up and say that has been, just in these last 2 days, has been just for me, has been something that says, yes, we will continue the fight. The idea of understanding where power is, how do we obtain power? And then when you look at that, who represents us? The idea of making sure that that representation has our interest and our concerns at heart. So democracy for us is so important, but it really gets down to the community level, with people talking about the things that they see and feel on an everyday basis. and they're still concerned about it. But the recognition that the message we've been giving them lately is don't stop. We're not saying that anything is going to change other than the plans that we've been talking about being in place for our upcoming primary, and then also the preparation and the steps you need to take to make sure you know where your polling place is and ready to get out on the 19th. And certainly we'll make sure that you're ready to go in November. Let's assume nothing has changed. I love what Ashley said, the idea of not coming up with like, oh, because we can't do this or we can't do this move. We've tried to educate our community that voting is a process. It's not an event. And that process is where we need to be. And that's the development and education of where Black power will be in these states, and certainly in our cities and towns in Alabama.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Kathy?
Yeah, so I just want
to
I want to add that the immigrant community has been used as a scapegoat for a lot of the bad bills that have come out of different legislators this year. And, when we look at the ruling of Callais, back in during the times before the Voting Rights Act, we had to count on our allies to stand in the gap for us. And the immigrant community, they're in that space right now. And it's because of the fight that we carried on during the civil rights movement that a lot of folk are realizing the benefits today. And in the immigrant community, they are from all over the world. They're not just brown people or Black people. And so we got to bring everyone together because one thing that this administration is doing is denaturalizing folk who are legally present. They're removing temporary protective status. And, so all of that is creating a lot of fear. And we got to overcome that. And we need our allies to stand in the gap and help the immigrant community move beyond the fear. And the great thing about it is all immigrants are not here illegally. A lot of them are voters. And we got to enter into those communities with respect and have deep conversations with them and encourage them to exercise their right to vote. And that's what we plan on doing in Mississippi. We're going to encourage our immigrant community as well as our Native community that's often overlooked to get engaged and vote, because our votes really do matter. And if they did not matter, they wouldn't work so hard to prevent them and dilute our votes.
Yes. So I want to move us into the second part. And as I mentioned, that the truth is none of this is new. And, what we're seeing right now is part of a consistent pattern in this country. We've said it, I think you all have touched on it. Every time Black communities and other historically excluded communities get closer to political power, the rules get rewritten, right? And I do want to name, not because the system is broken, but because it is operating in alignment with how it has always been structured. I think we need to be honest about the foundation of this country and also democracy. Because so if we don't locate this moment in that history, we risk misunderstanding what's actually happening and responding in ways that don't meet the moment. And so, Mitch, I want to start with you here in this second part to really help ground us in that historical through line. How does this moment connect to the patterns we've seen over time when communities get closer to power?
Yeah. I mean, I think, Kathy, what you ended on is important, that if they didn't want us, if they weren't so scared of us, they wouldn't try to take our power and take our vote. And I think if we situate that through some history, one of the experts that we use in our redistricting cases in North Carolina, talks about this talks about periods of white retrenchment. So if you look throughout history, like think post-slavery during the Reconstruction period, Black voting rights were through the roof. We had a lot of Black elected officials. And all of a sudden, Reconstruction ended in 1877, and now we have a period of violence. We have a period of violence and outright disenfranchisement of Black voters, stripping Black voters of their voting power and their humanity. And then you fast forward. We have to fight these battles. In the late 1800s, the early 1900s, up until the Civil Rights Acts in the 60s, and we get power back. After a long period of fighting. You think about your Thurgood Marshalls, your Constance Baker Motleys, your Charles Hampton Houstons of the world, fighting in communities on the community groups of John Lewis's, your Fannie Lou Hamers, fighting for voting rights, and we get it. Fast forward to 2008, you have the election of Barack Obama. Oh, we've reached the promised land now. We have the first Black president. We're in a post-racial society, and what happened after that? The chipping away of voting rights. You had Section 5 going away in 2013, and now Section 2 basically going away in 2026. Just as a way of, oh, you got too close. You elected your Black president, and now we have to take away your power. And so what we're seeing now is, and not just in redistricting, it's a cumulative effect of voter ID laws and felony disenfranchisement laws and redistricting. And when can you turn your ballot in, and rules around absentee ballots in general. There is this cumulative effect of trying to strip away our power, and that falls into historical alignment of when we get power, then there's white retrenchment and we lose it. However, this time feels a little different because we have history. We've been here before. And we just had the SOLVE convening last week. And one of our partners said that, it was a 40-year battle to get voting rights, and it took a 60-year battle for the other side to take them away. And now we have to have another 40-year strategy to get them back, and I think, it's important to note that, as Anisha said, we've been here before. We just have to go back and reclaim our history. We have to learn our history. Because that's something that, and this is outside of redistricting, they're trying to whitewash history, trying to show our kids, like I have a 3-year-old son and one on the way, they're trying to make sure that he's not learning his history. But guess what? His mama and I are going to teach him his history. His grandparents are going to teach him his history so that he knows that we've been here before. He'll know that, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but we got to do the bending. Right. He's going to take that and learn that. And so, last thing I'll say is that, our people power has always moved this country forward. People power has always changed hearts, minds, and the law. And we have to have that 40-year strategy. We have to continue pushing forward because they want us to quit. And we can't quit. Our ancestors didn't quit. Our foremothers and forefathers refused to quit. They put their lives on the line to make sure that we had voting rights. And we have to do the same. We have to dedicate ourselves to this work and continue to chip back away, at voter suppression, wherever we see it.
Yeah.
Yes, no, thank you for that. And what I want to do is pause and take 2 or 3 questions since we're at the halfway mark before we continue. And there's a question in the chat regarding alternative methods, or how would this affect electoral reform strategies. So from Heather, what does this decision mean when it comes to race conscious organizing? Meaning when we are organizing for representation, solutions like proportional representation, will remedies be rejected if the organizations and organizers promote our race forward in our community education and advocacy efforts? We'll sit with that in a second. And what I'm gathering is Heather's like, can we no longer talk about race in our work as we do this, this representation work?
Yeah. Anisha, I'll start us off here. So we can always talk about race. Like we can always talk about race. We can always push for our legislatures, our local city governments, local city councils, to make policies and to pass laws that help our communities. Like we can do that. One point in the actual opinion that I want to address, and I think is being overlooked, is that the court mentioned that when a local city council or jurisdiction, a state, changes the methods of election, for example, if they go from at large to districts or districts to at large, you have the ability to look behind what is the reason for that decision. If they are making that decision to make sure that Black voters don't have an opportunity to elect their candidate of choice, or to make it harder, like that's something that we can bring an intentional discrimination claim on, because that is intentional discrimination. Like we have the right to call that out. And so we have to continue to talk about race, and we have the ability to push our local boards to say, hey, we think districts would be a better opportunity for our communities of interest, to make sure that there's fair representation. Like we have every right to do that. And the court can't reject a remedy of a local city council or a local school board making districts that help communities of interest. That is their prerogative, and so we have to continue to push for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the third section, but like that is a pressure point that we can push on.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to add to that that Mitch said, I don't fully remember the question, but one of the things I think is very important is that we make this about inclusion, right? The whole idea of America is the consent of the governed, right? And so we exist. We are people. We live, we work, we pay taxes, we exist within the communities that we're asking to have a say in. And so, that's the thing that I think we need to bring back foundational. This isn't like Black people trying to get all the power or make all the decisions. We're simply asking for our share and our ability to contribute to the conversation about what happens to our lives, our futures, our families. And that is a very foundational part that I think most people understand. When I speak to young people, I often use the analogy, to sort of gauge their interest in the political space. I say, what's your favorite food? And they might say pizza. I say, what's your favorite TV show? They'll throw out a show. And I say, okay, well, if I came to your house and I said, today we're watching Matlock, and then, we're going to eat beanies and weenies, right? Like, how would you feel about that? And they always say, well, I would be upset. And I say, well, what would you do about it? And they say, well, I'll come take the remote, or I'll make sure we get something to eat. And I say, well, where's that same energy when it comes to the political process? Because you have people telling you what to eat. You have people telling you what to watch, but you don't engage in the process to do anything about it. And so that is the same energy that we must take to this to this political space and trying to get more people engaged. And yes, I did say Matlock. I aged myself. I was thinking about my grandmother.
See, you were safe. You should have said it was the reboot of Matlock.
Yeah, that's right.
However, I wanted to just add one other point too, is that I think what I've been telling folks too is this decision isn't just about Black folks, right? And I think people want to kind of reduce this down to like, oh, this is just hurting Black people. We're tired of them whining. Whatever, right? All of the things that have been fodder on social media these last couple of days. But I remind folks that after Reconstruction is when we got public schools because of Black people. After Reconstruction was when we got SNAP benefits because of Black people. Calais, like the Voting Rights Act did not just provide voting rights for African Americans. It provided voting rights for all minorities, which includes Black, brown, API, women of every race and ethnicity. And we got to stop thinking about, like this in some game that like, oh, it's just them. We don't have to worry about it. It's like if Black people have rights, then typically we have held the door open and made sure everyone got rights. And let's also talk about the Disabilities Act that was also, was literally following through that door that was opened by the Voting Rights Act. So again, you use a ramp. Guess what? That was the opportunity and the discussion and the necessity of being able to have access is something that the Voting Rights Act opened the door to. And so when we think about, like these things and what matters, if you've got, if you're LGBTQAI or you love someone that's LGBTQTI, I can't even say, let me not say all the letters because I can't keep them all together. However, the most important thing is that if you are a community or you love someone in a community that's being marginalized, just like we see in our immigrant communities as well, all of the rights that we've been able to win for any community that, in addition to the African-American community, has been and open the door for rights in all of those communities that have found themselves not the mainstream or not the prevailing values of whom we, I'm still trying to figure out like whose values are these. And even as we, enter the 250th birthday of this country, find ourselves in a moment where we aren't even mirroring the values of the Constitution, much less anything else. And so I just want to remind folks that in this moment, this isn't just about Black people. This is about anyone that has found themselves, on the other side of an agenda that does not include them.
I think Genesis' point is probably one of the strongest. And Genesis, I'm going to use it again, is the consent of the governed. And that's really, that is really key in terms of this discussion. We created a little program for the schools that was called a children's voting booth. And the kids get to vote on cookies. It's a chocolate chip or oatmeal cookies. No matter where we took this little makeshift voting booth, it was interesting that you had to be under 5 feet tall to get into the booth. But listen, we would have parents, everybody wanted to go in and vote for the cookie. And then they would stand there until we counted it to tell them what cookie won. So that whole process of voting, even though it was being done in this in this kind of makeshift way, the point that we were trying to get across, sometimes actually bringing these kids along and listening to their conversation about this vote, was something that was educating to mom and dad. And so it's like looking at and understanding that whole aspect, the consent of the governed. And they were so happy if their particular, whatever the cookie was that got the most votes, those were the ones that they were extremely happy about. And I think to be able to see that, it's the kind of thing that we can probably do in a variety of different ways. And that's going to be important. I also, when Mitch said building Black political power, one of the things that we've stopped talking about is just the vote, but trying to have people understand that vote is like one small brick going in a building that we're building, and it's the Black political power. And there is some much better understanding about the vote when we talk about it from the platform of power and who represents and who makes decisions. We've even asked individuals not to talk about us about they did something, or that indisputable or questionable group of theys that make these decisions that we have no idea who they are or how they came about. To be able to, we need to put a face on it. We need to be able to identify the issue. You need to be able to speak strongly about its impact on you and your family. And I think that even many of the things that you've talked about tonight, or I've just made some notes, are things that I know I want to make sure that we constantly repeat, because the language and the information is so key. My first opportunity to be in a room with Anisha was as she talked about lived experiences, and we just started collecting them. You collect as many of those as you can, because what you start to realize is that that's what communicates with people, not this business of, let's check and make sure you've got your proper ID and and you have the map so you know exactly where your voting place is. And they're looking at you like, okay, I still have these issues that I'm dealing with. How are those two things going to help me with that? And that's where we really get to the crux of the matter, so that it does then to start to boil down to building Black political power from a stronger base.
Yes, thank you for that, Ms. Beverly. And so there's actually the next question that I want to bring is actually about, Mobile. And so from Chanel, voting is on the 19th, primaries Mobile, do you have an idea of how, this decision and the SAVE Act, that they are trying to pass will disenfranchise minority groups? Is it connected? Ryan, if you want to take that from a policy standpoint, have at it.
So, the Show Me Your Papers Act is what I call it, because I like to make historical connections. I've even called it the Show Me Your Freedom Papers Act because that's essentially where we're at and what they're trying to do in Congress. However, one of the big things that the SAVE Act, which failed in the Senate thanks to people like Chanel demanding that their Congress people stop it, right? It passed out of the House, but it failed in the Senate. And that's directly a result of orgs, regular people calling and demanding that this bill be stopped. Now, will they try it again? Probably. Because when they take a loss, they just lock and reload. However, the biggest thing is the Save 2.0 Act is like a poll tax, essentially, because it mandates specific voter ID. And I would like to talk about the passport. Passport is not a cheap document. Even for those renewing, it's not a cheap. It's not cheap, right? And if you look at demographic breakdown, socioeconomic status, it is even more inaccessible. On average, nationwide, I believe it's 34% of African Americans have one, and then you go down, the percentage drops based on education level and socioeconomic status. Typically, your driver's license is the cheaper of the voter ID laws, and we've even seen states try to put an indicator on licenses for non-citizens. So I will say the passport and making women have their birth certificate match their married last names, which is who's carrying their marriage license around, okay? Who even knows where their birth certificate is offhand? So that's why I say it's a poll tax, because of the costs associated with getting that documentation. You have folks that were not born in a hospital. Some of our elders that are still here with us, whose signatures may have changed, who were not born in a hospital, will have a hard time providing that documentation. And you have states like Florida and Mississippi that did not wait for Congress to move on this. I will say with Florida, my colleagues in Florida would get mad at me if I did not state that the Florida SAVE Act will not take effect until next year. But the results and the harm of those bills remain the same. So I will say the biggest piece that it's functionally a poll tax. You were getting to a point where they're trying to create almost an apartheid atmosphere where we are having to prove every single day who we are, especially at the polls. There was once upon a time where this country didn't really agree with having some sort of national ID or a database. So it's funny that we are here now, and who's now proposing such legislation. But I did want to lift up to Chanel that the SAVE Act did fail in the Senate.
Thank you. And one last question before we dive in to our last set of panel questions, but really quickly. So this question, and if you all can answer it within 30 to 60 seconds, keep it really short. We have a question from Kate. Kate wants to know how can people support your organizations? They would love to hear, what each org needs from volunteers, technical support, and of course donations. Like how can they support?
So you can join your local NAACP. You can find your local NAACP by going to our national website. Membership is only $30 a year. Join the freedom fighters in your area. Get involved. All NAACP branches have 20 standing committees at least. There's a place for you in the fight for freedom.
I just want to say, mirror the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance. You can go to our website, www.yourmira.org and donate. And we really do need donations. As you know, the immigrant community as well as immigrant organizations have come under attack. And so anything that you can do to help us will be greatly appreciated. And we do need volunteers. You can call me on my cell phone, 601-906-1717. Join us and help us fight back repression.
For Stand Up Mobile, and we do same thing. Go to our website. It's www.standupmobile.org. We do have if you want more information, you can sign up to volunteer. We even ask you certain areas. Tell us what you would prefer if you were going to do something. I want a table. I want a canvas. I'd love to be a part of your communications channel. Those are the kinds of things that we certainly ask you to indicate to us. One of the biggest things for us lately, though, is I've asked individuals who volunteered with us from time to time, I need you to get us open up your businesses, get us into places that you work and your churches and organizations, so that when Stand Up Mobile is talking about being able to include everybody in our community in making decisions for us and being a part of the consent of the governed, that I'm not just necessarily talking to people at an open air atmosphere, but I'm actually going into some of these bastions of business and structure that are sometimes carrying the message that actually prohibits a lot of the good work that can be done in this particular area. So get them to open up and invite us in. We'll come in and work with you to do whatever needs to be done to carry the proper message about building political power, not just in Black communities, but in Mobile and in Alabama generally.
And Ashley Shelton here with Power Coalition in Louisiana. I dropped in the chat both our info at powercoalition.org, as well as our website, which is powercoalition.org. And there's so much information, opportunities to sign up to volunteer and to support the organization financially. And then also too, another thing that I think is so important is that, because this, I live and breathe voting rights, I have to remember that not everybody knows what happened or even understands the implications of the decision that was made by the Supreme Court last week. And so we're asking you also to help us share out the posts and follow us on social media at PowerCo EJ. And then Alabama Values and Solve, we all have media and communications that we're putting out. And so please share that, because it is I think that's the hardest hurdle that we've got to get over, because the answer is that we need everybody to show up en masse in the fall to send a really strong message, but people need to know why they need to send that strong message. And we've got to get the word out, and we've got to get the content out. And so also just welcome folks to follow us on social media and share the posts that you find compelling and help you explain to someone why this decision was so important to their lives and what actions they could take.
Yes. So Equal Ground, we're based in Florida. First thing that you can do is never grow weary in well doing. And I think we owe our communities a commitment to always be on the right side of history, to always continue to care. And I think if more people took that approach, it would make all of the jobs easier for all of the organizations that are on this call. That's first and foremost. But secondly, please join us on social media at Equal Ground Florida. We're equal-ground.com online, where you can learn more about the work that we're doing, upcoming events, obviously ways to donate and support the work financially, because it does take resources. I wish it did not, but it does take resources to travel the state and do what we do. Florida is a pretty large state. And so in addition to that, I would also mention briefly that on the first Monday of every month, we put out a newsletter. So we just had a newsletter go out today. And then on the third Monday of every month, we host the Black Political Empowerment Call, where we bring folks, state and national speakers onto the call to get updates around pressing issues in our communities. And so that can be a once a month space that you come into to learn and get the latest on where to plug in.
And for Solve, I just put it in the chat here. You can join us in the Solve network. We're a network of over 300 grassroots and grasstops organizations throughout the South. We share resources. We have a monthly newsletter similar to Equal Ground, where we share information and do spotlight our organizations. But it's really about coming together. And you also can learn more about SCSJ, the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, as well, through that same link.
Hey, everybody. If you want to follow our work, you can visit our website at www.alvalues.org and follow us on our social media at AL Alabama Values, and reshare our content to help raise awareness. Donations also help us to continue our work, hosting events like this and launching our storytelling initiatives to amplify voices and the work on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you all. You all are doing such dynamic work. I'm happy to be in partnership with you all on the ground, in the community, doing this work. History has shown us that there is power in the collective. And so I just really appreciate the work that you all are doing. So let's dive back into our questions. I have one additional question before we move into the power and strategy and what's next, before we close out with that. So I want to name something directly, that there is a narrative forming right now that this is the end. We're hearing it, right? Voting rights are gone, and that the courts have shut the door and there's nothing left for people to do. And we know that that narratives don't just describe reality, they shape it. They shape people's imagination or belief around what's possible. Because when people believe there's nothing that they can do, they disengage. I often say that you can't free a people who are still bound by the stories that they have been told. So think about that, right? And that pullback, that creates the exact conditions that allow power to consolidate without resistance. And so that framing is incomplete. So I want to turn to, Ashley and Ryan. What do you think people need to understand about this moment to resist that narrative, right? That this is the end. Where is power? Where is the power still? And what does it actually look like to engage right now? I think that's the piece people are grappling with. You say we still have power, but the courts did this and gutted this. Like, how do those two things exist in the same universe?
I think it's one thing while I think it's important to tell the truth and keep it a buck, I also want people to feel like they have hope, because when you talk in such a negative fashion about what happened, people tend to disengage, and that's the last thing we want. I would say, one, I think you should find your organizing home, right? You need to find a place that aligns, that's values aligned, that's doing the work on the ground, like our organizations. And I'm not of the belief that a court gets to tell me whether I'm free or not, right? And so I have to categorically disagree with this narrative going around that this is the end, because it's not. The Montgomery bus boycott took 18 months, right? What would it accomplish if we quit a day later or a week later, right? Like, we saw the momentum around boycotting Target, like collectively, not just Black people. Everybody got involved following Target's decision to ignore a significant part of its customer base. And so I just want people to not be discouraged. These things take time. You're seeing expansion of state voting rights acts. We know that they might not pass right away, but that does not deter us from pushing and moving the needle forward, because, there's a history in the movement space that I think we can all look back on. Some of our folks didn't live to see some of the successes that you and I and everyone on here are enjoying right now. So I really can't stand, to be honest, when the national narrative becomes, oh, well, this is it, all doom and gloom, because it's not helpful. It can actually be very harmful, especially for folks navigating what to do next, especially for those of us from and currently living in the Deep South.
Yeah, and I think throughout this whole journey, I mean, we've been fighting this case for so many years. I haven't, and we've won and we've lost, and we've won and we've lost, and had setbacks, and then actually realized the second majority minority congressional seat here in the state of Louisiana, and now are still fighting to hold that second majority minority seat for one more, for at least this next cycle, and so I think that so much of doing this work in the South has been accomplishing what most people thought could not be done, and so we have to believe in what's possible if we work towards it. And it's a lot of hard work. I can tell you now, I'm a little tired. My spirit's a little worn, but what I do know is that I will not. My liberation was never coming from the courts. That you're never going to get anything that you don't fight for. And then I think that there's also too, folks have been, I got 30 text messages in the last hour about how, the 6-0 congressional map is going to be proposed and it might pass. Well, I keep reminding folks of the math. We have the second largest Black population proportionally in the country, second only to Mississippi. And a third of the state of Louisiana is African American. And I said, and if they play that game of a 6-0 map, they make the Speaker of the House vulnerable and they make the majority whip vulnerable, and because you can't disappear me, you can't do nothing about the fact that statewide I still have power, and then no matter how they draw this House map, that Black and other minority voters will have power, and I think that goes for all of us. And the thing I've been telling folks is that we have the opportunity this fall to elect a Congress that will do the work of the people. There's some slim margins right now. I mean, like at the end of the day, all of this posturing, all of this, these emergency special sessions to redistrict, all of this is about power and about who has it and who gets to control it. And what I remind folks, if you are Black or another, Black, brown, API, or other minority, or you just care about democracy, right? Like you have an opportunity to elect a Congress that will do the work of the people and restore our rights. And that, what we have also forgotten is that we are currently operating under a Congress that has abdicated its responsibility. People forget that there are three branches of government. There are three branches of government, and one of them is dysfunctional and allowing the executive branch to run amok with our freedoms, our safety, our rights. And we have to remember that we have multiple tools in our tool belt, and that again, I will not be moved nor deterred. As we say, I've got time every day when it comes to my rights and my voice, and everything I love is in this place, including my mother and my children. And so guess what? I'm gonna fight every single day to make sure that, my mother lives out the rest of her days in whatever comfort and peace that she would like to. And that my children also have an option to want to even stay in the South, which was my fear before this, but certainly even greater fear, now that we are kind of sitting in this moment. But also, again, we have power and we have the opportunity to fight. There is a large, population of African American and other minority communities in the South in particular. And so as they race to try to neuter and erase our voices, we have to remember that we have power when it comes to Senate seats. We have power when it comes to statewide elections and statewide seats. And then too, no matter what they do at the legislative and the House level, that, they can't change where we live, right? And that no matter what they try to draw, right, that there is going to be some power that has to be reckoned with. And like I tell them in the current gerrymandered districts in Louisiana, I may not be able to choose my candidate of choice, but I absolutely can choose the winner in a runoff. And I think that those are the kinds of tactics and things that we need to think about. And I think that we need to stand in the reality that we can elect a Congress that can restore so much of what has been lost this year. And that we need to be doing the work in the South, but we need to also be doing this work across this country to get any voter that cares about democracy to stand with us, because again, the realities of the rhetoric are starting to be laid bare. I mean, our eggs cost more, our gas costs more. We just lost a flight option, an affordable flight option. A whole company, a whole corporation decimated overnight. 17,000 jobs, right? Like, so the realities of, of the policies and the rhetoric and that we have been seeing play out, there's a reality that's real for a whole lot of people that didn't think this was going to touch them. And we need to be able to message and move folks to fight for the America that we know can exist, and to fight for the multiracial democracy that we've never seen, but that we continue to wake up every day and fight for.
And that they want, yes.
Yes. No, thank you for that. And I want to talk about I want to move us into a strategy conversation and talk about strategy and pressure, because there are pressure points, because moments, like this can feel overwhelming. For all of us, folks who are in the fight, folks who may sit adjacent to the fight. I think the entire country is feeling this, whether they can describe it or not. People are feeling this in their nervous system. Right. And when everything feels important, it's hard to know where to focus. When there's chaos, it's hard to know where to focus, but we know not all pressure points are equal. So there are specific places where decisions get made, where influence can be applied and where strategy actually shifts the outcome. And so I want to turn to, Ryan and Mitch. I want to chat with you all for a second to just help us get really specific here. Like, where are the key pressure points right now? Legally, politically, at the state level. Where should attention and energy be focused?
I'll say, I think it's never too early to prepare for the next census.
Yeah, that's right.
We are 4 years out from the next one. Regardless of what's going on right now, it will still need to get done, and communities will need to fight for their right to protect their neighborhoods keep their neighborhoods from being broken up. The second thing is we need to really think about whether or not this current Constitution at 250 years old is working for us. We're 6 states away from a constitutional convention. Are we going to lean in or be scared? There's electoral reform measures like ranked choice voting and proportional representation, mind you, first promoted by the one and only Lani Guinier, Black woman, civil rights attorney, and legend all around. And she kind of saw these things coming. Mm-hmm. But I think at the crux of it, we have to get out into community and start having conversations where there are community briefings, teach-ins, freedom schools, if you will, and getting to the issue at hand that also meets people where they're at. Like Ashley was saying, people are worried about the cost of their stuff. So voting feels like it's up here, mm-hmm. and policy feels like it's up here. So we have to make sure we're communicating effectively what's happening in policy and how that shows up in the streets of America and in the Deep South. So those are some of the things that I think are pressure points. I've talked about the State Voting Rights Act. I don't know what it is about this case, but it got them going in the South, right? Like it was one of my hopes that when I started working on these with LDF, that the South would get some love finally, because we have had at least 50 years of the Southern strategy, for better or for worse. And we need to really think through what do we want? And state voting rights acts are, quite frankly, are even more comprehensive than the federal version of them. You can go further. You can have proportional representation, PRCV, as a legal remedy if you choose to do so. You can ban partisan gerrymandering if you want to. But I would say we need to really start thinking about what we want. We've got 4 years to the next census. It's never too early to be out in community talking about that. And if you're in a state with ballot initiatives, that's a direct democracy form that you can utilize. Litigation is one strategy, but it's not the only one. I'm a firm believer in suing these folks to protect our rights, but it's not the only way. And so those are just some things that I can think of off the top of my head that can be pressure points. And obviously being in your legislators' faces every state session, as well as showing up to your budget meetings in the cities, right? Because 9 times out of 10, the decisions your local representatives are making, especially your mayors and city councils, will impact you sooner, probably more so than later than your state legislature and federal government.
Ryan, it's like you read my notes right off my page. Yeah, Ryan and I have been doing this work for a long time together. So I knew she would steal some of my thoughts. And I'm glad she did.
Great minds think alike, Mitchell.
Great minds think alike. You're right.
Secret.
You're right. You're right. And so I'll add one more to the part about referendum processes. There's nothing that says that preclearance is unconstitutional. A lot of people misunderstood Shelby County, and you'll hear them say, preclearance is unconstitutional. That is incorrect. The formula that Congress passed in the VRA, the court found unconstitutional. There's nothing unconstitutional about preclearance. You can have that. There's nothing unconstitutional, as Ryan said, about outlawing partisan gerrymandering in your state. And I think one thing, and Carlos in the chat kind of mentioned this in his comments, is we need to start focusing on our communities of interest. We need to start defining what that community of interest is. For those who are not familiar with communities of interest, it's a traditional redistricting principle that's used in addition to other redistricting principles to keep communities of interest together. And those communities of interest are not necessarily racial or only racial. They can be racial, but they also can be economic. If you have a group of farmers connected with a group of urban, corporate folks, they have nothing in common economically. And so the choices that legislator or that state representative or state senator will make, regarding the economic needs of their community that they're serving may be completely different, and then you have the opportunity to ask them, who are you serving? Are you serving corporate interests? Or are you serving our community? And so I think that's something that we can definitely push on. And I'll share a quick story. In Edgecombe County, North Carolina, we pushed on communities of interest with the local school board. We drew a map that respected communities of interest, and not just Black communities of interest. It respected neighborhoods. It respected natural dividing lines in major roads in Edgecombe County. We didn't mention race one bit, but by focusing and respecting communities of interest, what it did is it kept because of segregation. Unfortunately, because of segregation, communities are Black communities over here and white communities over there. And when you draw a map in a majority Black community, guess what you have? More Black districts, without even mentioning the word Black. Not cool because it wasn't cool. But the good part about this is that if you poke somebody long enough, and as my dad would say, a hit dog always hollers, right? So we threw a rock, with this community map that had, 6 majority Black districts and 1 majority white district. Again, respecting communities of interest, not doing it for the purpose of getting more Black people into office. 2 white members of the board said, hey, these maps that you're drawing, the districts are too Black. We can't win. And we're like, that's on you. If you respected the community, and worked in favor of the community, no matter what race you are, maybe the community will be behind you. But because you said this racist comment of our districts are too Black and we cannot win, now we got to vote you out. So focus on communities of interest. The hit dog hollered, they lost their races. And we were able to show the power of the community. And that's a pressure point. And Ashley, to your point about focusing locally and state level, like if you start focusing on local elections and local politics and local policies, that trickles up to the state level. You start working on state level issues and making sure that, the representatives that are there are representing your communities. Guess who draws the maps? The state legislature. Until we get an independent redistricting commission or another referendum where it takes the power away from them, we can change the way we do this work because the federal government is only as power as the states. And we have the 10th Amendment to the Constitution for a reason, which all powers that are not given to the federal government reside with the state. The state has a lot of power. And if we start focusing on local and state policies and state law, and state judges, that takes away power from federal government, and we can really make some movement.
Yes, no, thank you for that. One thing I do want to touch on, Mitch, I think, or was it Ryan? Someone mentioned the Southern strategy, and I know we talk about that, and I want to make sure folks who are tuning in understand what we mean by the Southern strategy. I mean, just in plain terms, the Southern strategy was this, it was a political approach starting in the 60s, right, to win support, especially from white voters in the South, tapping into their racial fears and backlash without always saying it out loud. I mean, after the Civil Rights Movement, led to gains like the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. Many white voters in the South were angry about desegregation, the expansion of Black political power. Politicians, recognized that shift, and they saw an opportunity, to stabilize meaning in that moment. So instead of openly using racist language, they began to use more coded language. And I think you all have heard this coded language before, and you're hearing it today, but what people often call dog whistles. So they would talk about things like states' rights, law and order, welfare, urban crime, and on the surface, those may sound like, neutral terms, but in that moment, they were widely understood as signals tied to race in resistance to civil rights progress. And that strategy worked by reframing racial issues as political or policy issues, mobilizing white voters who felt threatened by change, oftentimes mobilizing them to the polls to vote in their own, against their own best interests, right? So, also using, part of the Southern strategy was shifting political power in the South over time. So in essence, the Southern strategy wasn't just about, elections. It was about reshaping how race could be talked about in public and moving from explicit racism to more subtle. And now history is repeating itself. And so we're hearing this language come up, and if I'm being honest, now people are saying the quiet parts, out loud, unfortunately. But I wanted folks to really connect the dots to, when we say, we're seeing essence of the Southern strategy, what that really means in this moment. So now, I want to turn to Beverly and Kathy. I want to come back around to you guys, you all. And I want to talk about, engagement. Like, what does real engagement? We talked about pressure points, power, and strategy. We want folks to stay engaged. But what does real engagement look like with communities beyond moments like this?
So I just want to say that community engagement is so very important. And we need to have town halls as well as pool halls, because we got to meet people where they are, and so many times we overlook the rough part of town, but I think that's where our margin lies. And we have to have deep conversation, not just surface, hi, are you registered to vote? But one thing that Black Voters Matter did that I really thought was an excellent idea, they did what they call issue mining. Ask people, what's important to you? How do you feel about this attack on the Voting Rights Act? In Mississippi, folk like Vernon Dahmer lost his life registering people to vote. Herbert Lee got murdered. Swerna Goodman and Cheney lost their lives in Mississippi. And now we have a Supreme Court trying to minimize all of that. No, we're not standing for that. We're going to provide economic pressure through selective buying and targeting, target fasting, among other, entities. We're going to tell our own stories. We have to do an education piece in our community. We need a rapid response. We need a rapid response so that everyone can have talking points like folk who are on the opposition side have. If something happens immediately, they are all spewing the same lie, in unison. We're going to be truthful about it, but we do need talking points. And, it's just so much to do. We need to plan. And especially in the immigrant community, so many are being detained and kidnapped, and they have U.S. citizens. These households are mixed status. So they have U.S. citizen kids, and these kids are coming home, and mom and daddy aren't there to greet them. So, we have to really start planning on what to do, how to deal with these attacks that we all are under. Because, you plan now. So, when it really gets bad, and believe me, next year after the midterms, it's going to be worse because the big bad bill has some stuff in there that's going to really hurt us, but they holding off on it until after the midterms. And it's just so much work to be done. Thank you, Saab. Thank you, Alabama Values, for giving us this opportunity to share with the public and to strategize. Thank you.
Stand Up Mobile sees community organizing is really the big word is education, but what we try to do is break it down. We use a lot of glossaries, helping people understand what these words mean and providing examples, because when you're out and you're even working with volunteers, sometimes the volunteers are intimidated by whatever the issue might be because they don't think they know enough about it. So it's a lot of the training that we've provided, as well as even tools for them to use, is to really try to make it as simple as we possibly can, with examples explaining what the words mean. And at the same time, we don't put a lot of material on tables, because the joke with me is at the end of a tabling event in the park, I go by the trash can to see how many of my flyers are in the garbage. But the best thing about it is recognizing that people can be overwhelmed with lots of pieces of paper about different things. So to try to keep it as simple as possible. When you mention pressure points, we try to actually identify what are the top key issues that we're hearing about right now that people are concerned about, and we focus just on those. The other is really thinking about the area. Most people seem to think that it's such a big responsibility to, let's say, canvass. We just suggested, you know what, you might just want to canvass in your neighborhood. If you look at, most neighborhoods are probably a block and a half long, and there might be, say, 10 houses on each side of the street, something like that, is having them understand that the work that they can do, and then also feel comfortable with it, is that they're talking and working with neighbors who are close by. Mobile suffers from, and there are lots of parts of Alabama that we don't have local newspapers. So where do people get their information? We try to use situations, even our newsletter, people will sometimes ask for copies of it because they think that it's information there that they wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to. But using the churches and recognizing that not everyone is on social media, or people who are sometimes the most engaged find it difficult to get what they need from going to social media. So we will actually try to plug into other local organizations. We've sent out toolkits it doesn't have Stand Up Mobile on it. It's a blank toolkit. Send it out so that any organization, put your logo on it, that people will respond to you, and then use that as a way to be able to try to educate the community, bring them up to speed. Election guides have been good friends for us, and we used a lot of those during our last election. We're doing the same thing now. And that the best part about that is that this is a way for people to be able to see all of the information really in one place. The other is not waiting for someone to have an event, but asking individuals that you have your own event. If you'd like for us to come to your neighborhood. We've been invited to even family reunions. Kathy mentioned going into pool halls. It's like wherever people are gathered, what we do is give them, let them know that we're willing to come in and be a part of that gathering. And that's one of the ways that we've become a trusted source for information, and also someone to reach out to when there are things that they're concerned about. And And while we can't do everything, but we at least have a list of other partners who work in housing or food shortages or transportation that we can pass it on to. Community engagement it's not just a one subject. You really, when you get out there, you need to be prepared for people to meeting them where they are, and they will tell you exactly where they are and what's on their minds.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I want to remind folks to we're coming to an end, and so we have 2 more questions, and I want to remind folks to put your questions in the chat because we'll have time to take at least 2 or 3 more questions from the audience before we close out. So I want to talk about coordination, and so I want to chat with you, Ashley, Genesis, Alitra. Especially because we're in the South. We're talking about the South. I'm smiling as I think about this because just of the history here. Because in the South, coordinated power is not new. It is actually part of our lineage. When you think about the civil rights movement, that wasn't isolated work happening in one place. That was coordination across states, across organizations, across tactics. You had the legal strategy, the grassroots organizing, the faith institutions, the student movements, all of that, right? All moving together. And not always in the same way, but in alignment toward a shared goal. And I think, even beyond that era, Southern organizing has always been relational. Each of us, we have a relationship on this call, and it's been built on trust, proximity, and just an understanding that in the South, the messenger matters just as much as the message. So, when we talk about, coordinated power today, especially in moments like this, I do think, it's not just about activity happening in multiple states. It's really about alignment and shared strategy. And so, Ashley, Genesis, Alitra, I want to turn to you and I want to talk about coordinated power. What does coordinated power look like across states right now, especially in the South? I know you all are coordinating with states across the South. You're coordinating in state. What does it require, and what should we be paying attention to, in terms of how this moment is being organized on the ground? What does it call for us as a collective?
Yeah, no, I think, I think it's one of the things that I love about being from the South, right? Is that the same thing that makes the South unique is the same thing that gives us power, right? Like this idea that no one is a stranger, that if I have something and you need it and I don't, I'm happy to share it. This idea that, we can work together to problem solve. And what's funny is that it's really polarized in politics, right? But when you actually get to the ground in community, people will help each other. I mean, we're a disaster prone state. So is Mississippi, so is Alabama. And, I'm always reminded in times of disaster what we're willing to do for each other outside of the political realm, right? We're able to take care of each other's neighbors. You introduce politics, it gets messy, right? But the reality is that people just want to live their lives and enjoy. And then I think for those of us that do this work is daunting. It is intense. I think, I feel like all I do is fight, right? You never get a break. And I think that it's been the relationships with partners, both in state and in our partner states that have, that hold us down and keep us moving in this work. And in Louisiana, Power Coalition has always been clear that I cannot build power for Black and other communities of color if this is just about how big can Power Coalition get or how many staff can we have. No, I need to have trusted community leaders and communities throughout this state. And so Power Coalition regrants dollars to strengthen and build that connective tissue. But also too, from a power analysis, right? I know that, okay, so I always give the quick math about Louisiana. So 50% of the state's population and almost all of its tax base comes from Baton Rouge South. So South Louisiana is the economic engine for this state, and also the population centers and the largest population centers, and and population as well. So but when I get to the legislature, none of that matters, right? I still need 54 votes to pass something in the House and 21 to pass it in the Senate, and so that connective tissue, those relationships, being able to work with and link with those other trusted community leaders is the only way we win, right? And it doesn't matter how rural your community is. What matters is if I can move I can move my number towards the number that's going to be necessary to change outcomes positively for Black and other voters of color. And so, like those partnerships, those opportunities to work together, like again, this work is so big that there's never, I always tease, I was just like, please help me. Please, hit like Kevin Hart's comedy routine, but I'm not laughing. Help me. Please volunteer. Please, please say your organization wants to support. And just like Miss Beverly, mentioned before, like I can't do 1,000 events. I can support 1,000 events, but I can't do 1,000 events. And so invite us in. We've got materials, we got printables. I've got staff and volunteers that are willing to help. And so again, it's like we have to build that culture, right? Mm-hmm. Where community is just like Power Coalition will help you. Ashley will help you. And I don't have any, I don't have any ego or need to be out front. What I want is for you to organize your community and to be able to support that and lift that up in any way that I can. And I think that's the Southern way. And I think so many of our organizations work that way. And right now, even in this moment, as we are fighting for voice and power in the South, I mean, it has been many of the folks on this panel that we have leaned on each other. We have supported each other. We've been together in the midst of this decision coming down. And those are the things that hold, that remind me that one, I'm not alone. There's nothing that's too big for me to break into pieces and work with my partners across the region to solve, and that I don't have to know every answer, and that I get to play a lawyer on TV because I actually know lawyers like Mitchell Brown, who's going to give me all the information I actually need to stay out of trouble. And so I do think that's what's beautiful about the South. And one thing I wanted to add about the Southern strategy. That's so true as well about like how we overcome, like this moment. It is true that once this big ugly bill goes into law, people are going to die in the South, because here's the secret to the Southern strategy, right? The reason that they can, plant and seed their terrible strategies and take them wholesale to the rest of the country is because the federal government would backfill our budgets. I mean, more than 56% of the state's budget in here in Louisiana comes from the federal government. That will no longer be true once the big ugly bill goes into effect, affecting specifically Medicaid. And we are a very poor state and we're a very sick state. And so, people, I've talked about this. Folks are like, oh my God, stop being so dramatic. And I said, I wish it was dramatic. I said, it is sad and disheartening that this is what we think about our fellow man, that we're okay with people dying just because they don't have access to economic opportunity, because the policy doesn't allow for our economic opportunity to exist. And so just want to remind folks that we've got some challenges that are going to bring these things even more vividly to bear. And I dropped in the chat the Black tax. So in many of our communities throughout the South, fines and fees are the ways in which they keep so many people, white and Black, anybody that's poor, actually, trapped in a never-ending cycle of poverty and criminalization. You can't, as soon as you get out of one cycle, then you can't pay the fine or the fee, and then you're in another cycle. And so, we found and been able to work together with partners to be able to do things like Warren clinics and other things to be able to give people back their driver's license, to be able to give them a payment plan, to be able to drop the state or these cities will never get these fines and fees. And so like think about your organizing, or think about ways and remedies that you can work in your community, to use the levers we have to problem solve. And also because of those Warren clinics, whereas people didn't care about the judicial races in New Orleans before, people actually now make the connection between the judges and their rights, and the judges and their quality of life. And so there's so many opportunities for us to maximize this moment and to use some of the things that they meant to really hurt poor and minority communities, and use it to our advantage to create, solutions that they can't say no to, because of just the simple demand. And when we did those warrant clinics in New Orleans, not only did we save the people millions of dollars, we saved the city of New Orleans $1 million that they were never going to get back because they were trying to pay all these people to terrorize our communities. And so I just, offer that as just like a little, a little bit of sunshine, a little bit of hope around how you take something that they mean for harm and to perpetuate systemic racism and the criminalization of certain communities and turn it on its head and offered it as an opportunity to community instead.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, thank you for that. Genesis, take it away.
No, that's good. I mean, I really just have to do a mic drop after that. I think she hit it on the head in terms of all the points. The thing that I would add is the old adage, many hands lifted makes the load lighter. And I think that is sort of our thinking and how we should be coming to this work and recognizing that the harm, the destruction, the attacks on our community, they're in abundance. And unfortunately, there is too much work and few laborers, right? And so I think working in coalition obviously allows us to expand our reach, allows us to expand our capacity, because we can't do it all, but we know that we need to keep our eyes on the ball and do the work and continue to engage. And then also when it comes to this unique environment that we're in terms of the organizations that are funding our work, right? We know that we need to do some resource sharing. We need to be collaborative around sharing data, sharing best practices, things that work, right? When you have a win in your community, maybe we need to be on the phone talking about what was the path that you took to get there. Because like I said, there's an abundance of challenges that we face in our communities. And if we're not leaning in, working together in this moment, we've missed all of the lessons that have come before us, and we really miss an opportunity to do the work in a meaningful way.
And one thing, Anisha, I'm sorry to interrupt, but one thing that we have not mentioned is we got to go back to our old landmark. And that old landmark is the church. So I'm a part of a new organization, the National Christian Leadership Movement. And our goal is to bring the church back into the fold because that's one institution that has really helped us in our struggle. And so we need to think about bringing the church, excuse me, bring the church in.
Yes. Yes, no, the Black Shark definitely played a role and will continue to play a role. And I'm familiar with the new organization under the leadership of Reverend Kenny Glasgow. I'm looking forward to just the work that you all the impact that you all are gonna make. Alethea, coordinating
So,
across states.
not much to add. Ashley did a for real mic drop.
Yes.
So in Mississippi, we have to work in coalition. There's so much work. We just can't do it alone. We're blessed to work with partners that trust us and that we trust, and it allows us to work in our zone of excellence. I have members, I can bring members to your events. I don't have policy experts, so I lean to my sister organizations for that. We have sister organizations that are helping to build pipelines of candidates, which is wonderful. So once these maps are redrawn, we can pull people from around the state to actually run for office. So working in coalition is the only way to fight this battle. And these coalitions go back to civil rights and SNCC. SNCC was the official first C3 table. So we're working within a structure that we know works. So we just do it.
Awesome. So last question of the evening, and it's a 30-second lightning round. And so the question is, if we get this moment right, what shifts, what becomes possible? If we get this moment right, what shifts and what becomes possible? 30-second lightning round. Who's going to kick us off?
We get the community and nation we deserve and want.
We expand the electorate to actually reflect our communities and protect our voice.
Our communities actually get protected and not just used as pawns in a political game.
Our communities recognize their power and understand exactly what they need to do to move forward.
We bring everyone together. There are no big I's and little U's. Everyone is important and everyone has something to contribute. Mitch often asks the questions, who's not in the room? And we have to start asking that. Whenever we meet, who is not in the room, regardless of how large or how small the group may be. But we need to bring everybody together so that we can have troops on the ground.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say that, we can finally realize a multiracial democracy. I mean, I always tell folks, I said, we've been working towards something that we've never seen. We know it's possible, but we have never fully realized it. And I think that this is the moment that we're either going to fully realize it or find ourselves, fighting another multi-decade, fight. But I do feel like we can codify into law the protections that are necessary for us to have full citizenship in this country and full voice.
True.
Yes. Oh, and I think the irony here, I mean, America turns 250, this year. And it's like, can we get it right? You're old enough, to as the old folks used to say, you are old enough to know how to act. Like, but with that, I think we have one question in the chat, and then we'll close out. Here we go. Well, two questions in the chat. So from Colin. So Colin says at the beginning of the 1964, at the beginning of 1964, Black folks had almost no representation in the U.S. government. Regardless, civil rights leaders organized the civil rights movement, through efforts like the Montgomery bus boycott, the Selma March, and March on Washington, and ultimately would force Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Immigration Act, and more. And despite, they did all of this despite not having, quote unquote, electoral power. So can anyone talk about, how we can exercise political power, even with reduced electoral power? And I would ask that we keep the comments short for time.
That's a good question.
I know. I think we're trying to reimagine it too, right?
Anisha, I actually had the privilege of working a year in the classroom with Bob Moses, one of the architects of Freedom Summer at Lanier High School, my alma mater. And one thing that Bob would do, he would bring his fellow civil rights veterans into the classroom so that the young people could hear their stories. And so I think that that we were able to accomplish so much because everyone was on the same page. In the barbershops, the beauty salons, at the churches, everybody was on the same page. So we got to get everyone on the same page in order to move forward. And, even though they did not have electoral power, they had allies. So when the students from the North came to the South to register to host freedom schools and register people to vote, and the world saw how they were mistreated, and threatened, and some even lost their lives, then it opened the eyes of the whole country up. And they said, well, we can't allow this to continue. And Fannie Lou Hamer asked the question, is this America? And I asked that question today, is this America? We really need to come together and be on one accord, on one page, one sheet of music, so that we can move forward. And we can do it even in our post-Callais society.
That's great.
Yes.
So I want to add, for this political power, we can do it at the grassroots level. There are boards and appointments with every city and county. Get appointed. Get on the board of your local housing authority. Shape what policies happen in these places. Also in Mississippi, and this is I don't know if this is any other state, but this is real crazy for Mississippi. Run for justice court judge. You can be a justice court judge with a high school diploma. They send you to judge school for a few weeks. And then you determine what happens when people are being evicted from their homes. So there's so many races that people can jump in that are usually not contested or not known about. So get involved, talk to your community members, get on these boards, help to shape the future that you want to see.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So final question of the evening.
Can you get
how do
Genesis
you?
back on, Anisha? There's a note in the chat. Genesis was.
Yes, I did see. He's no longer in the waiting room. So the question, how do you reassure someone who believes, in the movement, but does not believe, the tangible reward is satisfactory? Someone said that they meet many people who feel there is no way forward that will really, truly heal communities. And I think what this question gets at is the despair that folks are feeling as they watch progress, be rolled back in real time. And definitely this makes me think about the power of the radical imagination that folks had in the 60s. But if we can get, one person to take this for time, yeah.
I was just going to say, talk about radical imagination. I mean, we've done away with the Department of Education, we have done the things that have happened in this last year alone, right? And we're only in May, is unbelievable, right? But what it also means is that if we can quickly do terrible things, so we can quickly also do amazing things. And, and for me, again, I just remind folks, I mean, there is a real opportunity both in critical states of the South, but the rest of this country to elect a Congress that will restore our communities. And one of the most critical issues, and is economic opportunity, which has, often been shielded from, Black and other minority communities in the Deep South. And so I just say that, again, we can have a Congress that will do the work. The wheels of change no longer take multiple cycles. The wheels of change, it can happen in a month. It can happen in the first quarter. It can happen in the first 100 days. And so what does it look like for us to elect a Congress where we are absolutely clear what they're going to do in the first 100 days? That is going to make us whole and restore what has been lost, and also have the radical imagination to go above and beyond just what feels absolutely necessary, but what is also the next thing. What is the next 250 years of this country look like, and what has to be codified into law today, or on the other side of this, these congressional races in the fall, that will get us where we want to be. And so again, if there are no rules, then we shouldn't go back to the way that many electeds have always moved, which is that everything takes time. They're afraid to take risks. They're afraid of being reelected. Well, you do need to be afraid of being reelected, because guess what? From now on, if every cycle something else can be either destroyed or put back together, then we're going to make sure that that we're electing candidates that are unafraid and that are going to do the work of the people. And so, and so even though folks are dismayed, again, you have to keep believing in the process. And I tell folks all the time, the process is broken. Like I said, I've been working towards a multiracial democracy I have never seen. Okay. But my ancestors believed in it. And so therefore I believe in it. Right. And I believe that we are uniquely positioned as we start this next civil rights movement to realize it and to codify into law, not just through a Voting Rights Act, but into actual law, that anybody that is a citizen of this country should have access to, to fair representation, and that fair representation is actually considered a part of how we define citizenship in this country.
Yes. No, thank you for that. And what a way to close. With that, I want to thank the panelists for, all y'all for doing the work, most importantly, and also for joining us. And I want to leave us with this, just a reminder that nothing about this moment is new. Like, What's new is how we choose to respond to it. And I'm thinking about the people, who came before us in this work, like people who were facing far more visible barriers, far fewer resources, and still found ways to organize, to build, to move this country forward. And so they didn't have the option to believe that there was nothing they can do, and neither do we. Because truly, our power has never come from a single decision, a single court, a single institution. It has always come from people, people organizing, like folks on this call, people telling the truth, people refusing to disengage, folks who are listening in and asking questions, right? Even when the system tries to make us disengage. And, and just a reminder that every gain that has expanded democracy, in this country came from people who chose to act, even when the conditions were stacked against them. So this is, this moment is not the end of anything. It is a continuation, and what we do next, becomes part of that story. So the question is not, again, just what does this court decision mean? Like, what did the court decide? It is, what meaning are we going to attach to this moment, and what are we going to do with it? And so I'll leave you all with that. And hopefully you got some resources and knowledge and information to help you, think through that, and go and talk to your folks. Go talk to your neighbors, your neighbors, have this conversation at your kitchen table. Stay engaged and informed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.